got it right. By email before the end of the class session in which it was due. So if we have a homework assignment that's due, for example, Monday, and you're missing Monday, you could still turn it in by email as long as you emailed it to me before Monday's class was over. Scarlett, where's Scarlett? All right, new leader. Okay, 2 more. How many homework assignments will you complete in this class? Two, yeah, we were just talking about this, right? 2 homework assignments. And again, I created a big menu. We'll go over it later, but you can choose any 2 of those. You'll do different ones for each assignment, and hopefully they will be fun and kind of push you a little bit. Still Scarlett. Okay, last question, most important question of all. Who's my favorite football player? Threw in a random baseball player, so well, maybe not random. All right, very nice. I do like Peyton Manning, or whoever said that. Like, not that he's playing anymore, but I do like him, and I love Cooper Kupp, but Brady for sure, right? Okay, just for fun. That was probably not at all important, but just, you know, couldn't help it. All right, so let's see where we at for our people. Andrew came in 3rd. Nice job, Andrew. Abby came in 2nd. Nice job, Abby. And, well, the suspense. Scarlett came in 3rd. All right. Okay. So if at any point you won one of the rounds, or you are one of these 3, come up to me at the end and get some candy from me. Just for fun, just a quick review of the things that we talked about last time. So things to definitely remember. Let's close that because it's just going to keep making noise on me. Here we go. Yes, we will leave. Okay. So again, hold on to that syllabus. If you think of any questions at any other point, feel free to ask. But hopefully, those are some of the key things to remember. Maybe not the Brady thing, but everything else is probably a little bit important to remember. The other thing I want to do before we get started here is I want you to kind of exchange information with some people around you. Now, we're creatures of habit, and a lot of you have already sat in the same spots that you sat in last class. That tends to be just how we are as people. We pick a spot and we stay there. Not to say that you can't move, but you're probably going to end up near similar people all semester. And I'm a great resource, obviously, if you miss a class, or you could watch the recorded lectures that I'll post. But your classmates are always going to be a great resource as well. If you miss a class, you might email or like text the person next to you and say, did I miss homework? Can I get a copy of your notes? It's nice to have a couple of people to reach out to. So what I'd like you to do is just find a couple of people around you, exchange an email or a phone number or like a social media name, whatever you're comfortable exchanging. But that way you have somebody to reach out to if you do miss a class as a resource. So I'll give you a couple of minutes and then we'll go from there. But find a couple of people around you. You can always add other people later, but at least now you have a couple of people, hopefully.
Yeah, I would try to make contact in the mind the same as
I don't, but there's a stapler. Just don't put it through like your forehead.
My best actually once a year thing.
Oh.
I forgot that I was supposed to.
So what my you're building them to like if you have them
Yeah.
and then watch them. All right, did everybody get a couple of numbers? Or emails or whatever? I had the cheesy thought you can go home and be like, I got some numbers today, but I should just keep those things to myself, but I'm completely incapable of doing that. So I wrote this up here as well, safety security. Really sad that we have to think about and talk about things like our safety and security while we're in here together. But I want to put that number up here on the board, not a bad one to have in your phone. In the past, if something happened, if there was an emergency, they wanted us to call campus security. Now, if there's any kind of an emergency, something on campus, something you notice, something happens in here, right? If I like fall over one day and I'm like not responding, somebody called like 911 or campus security for me, all right? My first class here at the college 13 years ago, my first class ever as like a community college instructor, I had a student walking out, they tripped, fell, hit their head and passed out. I was like, oh, welcome down to teaching. So if something ever happens to me or to someone, or you notice something, they want us to call 911. Okay, but I want you to have campus security. That's a good number to have. Hopefully we never have to worry about any kind of threat, but I mean, I'm sure you're all very aware of the news and the things that have happened across our country. It's good to have the security number in case you need it. If anything ever happens on campus or in here, again, call 911. Okay. I told my daughter yesterday, my youngest, I was like, do you know how to call 911 if something happens? She's all, yeah, you push 911 and hit call. I was like, okay, well, I'm just checking, right? So my 8-year-old, the sass, there's so much sass in my house with 3 little girls. But you have that number, you have some numbers for each other. So again, if anything were to happen, there's that number at 911. If you miss a class, you can email me or reach out to a classmate. The other thing to say, and then we'll get started here on our first chapter, which is always kind of exciting, is I mentioned this last time, I would really recommend that you take notes. Okay, and this is totally up to you. By now, I'm sure you know what works for you or what doesn't. But I always kind of make the same suggestion, so I'll make it again today. The slides are posted on Canvas. Okay, so you don't necessarily need to write what is in the slides. You have access to the slides. What you want to write is anything else. If I write something on the board, that would be something you would want to write in. Right? If you have questions or thoughts or I give examples that are helpful, write those things in your notes. And what I've had a lot of students do over time, and I'll just share this with you. I've had people print the slides in like a 3-slide format like this, where you have the room for notes, and then write their stuff next to it. Now, this is totally optional. You don't need to print these, they're online. But sometimes if people are really visual learners, having the actual slide, you can highlight it or write on it is helpful. So this is what a lot of people have done in my classes, is print them in that like 3-slide format. But I would recommend taking notes. It's good to have them. I might make suggestions of like, this will be on the exam, or this is a really like important concept, or I write stuff on the board that's not in the slides. That's all the stuff that you would want to write down. Okay, so again, it's totally up to you. It's also not a bad idea that people you exchanged information with, you could swap notes with. If you miss a class, maybe they could help you with notes. You could email each other. you all are your best resources in addition to reaching out to me. Okay, so again, I would recommend notes, but it's up to you. I think it's always better to over prepare for the first like exam and in the first part of a class, and then you can dial it back if you need to. You don't want to have that moment of like, I should have done more, right? And so I think it's good. It's a good practice to have. All right. So we're going to jump in here, but any last questions or anything before we go into chapter 1? I'm excited. The last slide's always sad. The first slide's exciting, right? Like new semester. All right. So chapter 1, we're going to look a little bit at, what is this idea of sexuality? What is sexuality? A little bit related to that. And then we'll talk about different areas of the world and some of the kind of hallmarks of different cultures and times related to sexuality to get us up to how we view sexuality in the United States as of now. And I have a really cool part of a documentary that we'll watch probably on Monday, but we'll build up to that by talking about sexuality around the world just a little bit before that. So when we talk about this term of sexuality, it's a very, very general term, talking about any feelings or thoughts or behaviors or anything concerning sex. A lot of topics that we'll cover in this class, right? We're going to look at how we research sexuality. We're going to look a little bit at gender and male and female sexual anatomy. We'll talk about communication and love and relationships, pregnancy, contraceptions, STIs, selling sex. There's a lot of topics that we're going to cover over the course of the semester. All of them capture within this term of sexuality. And we all come into this class, every single one of us, with a different level of comfort and knowledge when it comes to sexuality, right? Some people have a very difficult time talking about anything related to sex. Other people maybe talk about it too much or too comfortable, right? There's a whole range. And so when we talk about sexual intelligence, it's our knowledge and understanding and comfort related to topics that we're covering in this class. And we could say there's kind of 4 realms of sexual intelligence. There's how well we understand ourselves, right? Our own ideas and things that we have personally related to sex. How well we communicate with others. How well do we do in relationships, with communicating, with conflict, with all of the different things that involve other people. Our scientific knowledge. Do you know all the terms for anatomy? I hope you do a little bit better by the time that you leave. This is probably, hopefully, one that you grow on quite a bit. I mean, hopefully all of them, right? But we'll learn a lot of like the technical terms for things, the names of hormones and parts of the body, so that you can better communicate that to other people. And then the last element has to do a little bit with culture, right? The cultural context of sexuality, right? Stereotypes and norms related to sex, things that are portrayed in the media, right? It's stereotypes and so on. And I hope that every single one of you grows a little bit, right, in your sexual intelligence as we go through this class. And I hope I learn things too. I always learn random things in this class, and I love that about this topic. And just for fun, we're going to do a little activity just for fun related to sexual intelligence, kind of a preview of things to come, if you will. I want you to get into groups of like 3 or 4. So like 3 or 4 people. So I'll give you just a minute, find like 3 or 4 people, whoever's around you, and then we'll go from there. So we have group 4, 3, Josh. Okay, so what I want you to do, I want you to send one person out from your group, and you're going to get a whiteboard, a marker, eraser, or a wipe, or both, right? I brought wipes because I figured they might get rid of it a little better. You can grab an eraser, a wipe, a whiteboard, and a marker. So just send one person up to grab those things. Just grab one of each. Grab a wipe and an eraser. You have options. And if your marker's dead for some reason, you can come grab another one. They should be fine, but just in case. Okay.
Jocelyn.
So you're gonna need somebody in the room to be the person who writes. So figure out somebody who's willing to write on the whiteboard.
I have terrible measures.
As long as it's legible. It's
All right. Everybody have someone who's gonna write? Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. I have 13 questions. We'll go through them one at a time. And these are things that we're gonna cover throughout the semester, but they're kind of just fun, random things that we're gonna cover. Testing your sexual intelligence as a group here. And no worries if you get them wrong, we're gonna talk about them all semester. So what I'll do is I'm gonna give you a question, and as a group, you'll have 30 seconds afterwards. So let's try and do this quick to write down your best guess or most creative answer if you don't know, right? And then what we'll do is we'll hold them up and we'll see how we do. Okay. So, and again, don't feel bad if you don't know the answer. These are things we're going to cover. Okay. So question one, I'll give you the question and then as a group, discuss it really quickly and write your answer down. Okay. So number one, Masters and Johnson were who? Who are Masters and Johnson? Make your best guess again if you don't know. Go with them. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a second.
So go ahead and write your answer down for your best guess.
No, wait.
All right, everybody have your answer? Can we ready go ahead and hold them up? Let's see what we got. Sex researchers. Yes, they were sex researchers, all right? Some of these are more fun than others. Okay. All right, this next one, true or false, 50-50. A woman creates 1 egg per month on average. A woman creates 1 egg per month on average. True or false?
Yeah. Oh, we speak all.
All right, everybody. All right, go ahead and hold them up. False. It's false. I got you, right? Okay, so women are born with every egg they will ever have. They will create a new one every month, but one doesn't mature every month. It's a little tricky, but false. Okay. I think this is a fun one. Number 3. Okay. If your doctor asked you to point to your corona, you would point to what? Your corona. What would you point to?
Like, Dennis Baker.
All right, everybody. Okay, hold them up. Pelvis, chest, head, eye, right? My beard, I like that. Definitely a good guess. Okay, so the tip of the penis is called the corona. So next time somebody asks you if you want a corona, you say yes, right? Number 4. penis-sized when erect on average?
I thought it was 1.5.
We'll go with in the United States. All right, go ahead and hold them up. 4 inches, 4.55, 5.56, 5.7. I love how specific that is. So 5.6 specific. 5 to 6 inches is the average. All right.
Yeah.
So, sure. Okay. Number 5. How many sperm do men produce on average each day? How many sperm do men produce each day? No, that's only on mine. Yeah. All right, everyone ready? All right, go ahead and hold them up. 200 10,000, 1,002. I like the extra 2, right? 300 million. Okay. This one's a true or false. Good, ready? Okay. Cornflakes, cereal, were developed to lower sex drive and stifle masturbation. True or false? All right, go ahead.
Exciting.
Definitely true. Same with the graham crackers. Graham crackers and cornflakes were developed to try and encourage people to not masturbate by eating bland food. Something to think about next time you eat a graham cracker. 7. All right, the capacity for sexual response is present at what age? The capacity for sexual response is present from what age?
Yeah.
The sexual response present in what age? In the womb, 11, 10, 10, 13, 9, 8. So I have 3 girls, so I didn't. But ultrasound for little boys having erections. It starts that early. All the way down. Okay, number 8. This one's a true false. Okay. If the man withdraws before he ejaculates, a woman cannot get pregnant. My brother learned this the hard way. You all said it out loud. Hopefully no one else learned that from experience, like my poor brother. Okay, number 9. A woman is pregnant. This is true or false as well. Sorry. A woman is pregnant once an egg has been fertilized by a sperm. A woman is pregnant once an egg has been fertilized by a sperm. True or false?
Is it?
All right, everyone ready? True, false, true, false, false. This one's false. So that's step one, but you're not actually pregnant until it implants into the uterine wall and it starts releasing. Number 10, just a couple more. Number 10, true or false. HIV can be transmitted through contact with saliva. True or false? All right, go ahead and hold them up. 10, true, false, true, false. So false is the correct answer, unless there's only one scenario, and that would be if you had an open cut in your mouth, and the person kissing you also had an open cut in their mouth, in which case you shouldn't be open mouth kissing, right? That would be the only scenario. Otherwise, it's false. Saliva is not one of the fluids that transmits HIV, unless there's blood in the fluid, blood in the saliva, and the person has an open cut. Has to be a very specific scenario there. Okay, number 11. 3 more. What is the average age at which people lose their virginity? All right, go ahead and hold them up. What do we got? 14, 15, 16, 16, 15, 16, 17, 17, 17. So I hope it's not 14. So 17, it keeps moving up, and it depends how we define losing your virginity, right? But 17 on average. Okay, 2 more. This one's slightly frightening, but number 12, what percentage, so give you a percentage, of sexually active people, we'll say between the ages of like 18 and 25, have an STD or an STI? What percentage of sexually active people have an STD or STI? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got? Hold up the percentages. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. All right, 87, 85, 40, 33, 75, 63, 56. Thank goodness all of you are really hot. Right? I don't know if that makes me feel better. It's 25%. One in 4, which feels like a lot, but a lot of people are way higher. So maybe that I don't know. Okay, last question, just for fun again. Last question. How long after intercourse can sperm stay alive inside a woman's body? Holding up. 72 hours, 3 days, 3 days, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days. Why? Normal spot. You just put them in a pile right now. All right. Okay, so again, that's just for fun, just to give you a chance to think about it. We'll talk about a lot of those topics as we go along, so don't go back if you didn't know the answer. You will by the end of the semester, if you don't now already, right? So what we'll do from here for the rest of our time today is we'll look really briefly at some different cultures around the world, different times and cultures, and look at some of the kind of trends and hallmarks of those times and cultures. So we're not going to go into them in great detail. The book does a beautiful job of giving you a little bit more. But I do want to highlight, because all of these different regions and times have gotten us to where we are today in terms of what's normal and what's typical and like our attitudes around sexuality. So we'll look at some different places in the world, and as I said, kind of build up to today. So starting with the ancient Mediterranean. And I tried to give you like a map to begin with in case you're like, I have no idea where that is, right? The ancient Mediterranean is looking at Egypt, Greek culture, Roman culture, and this is kind of one of the earlier times that we have documented in terms of our knowledge around other cultures' sexuality. And so if we start with Egypt as the first slide, and I kind of gave you more images than information because I thought they were really interesting and kind of fun to look at. If we look at ancient Egypt, we're looking at way back like BC, right? Like 1000 BC or even before. And if we look at the early ancient Egyptian culture, we have a lot of evidence of sexuality. We can see it in like the hieroglyphics and the different documentations and artifacts that we have from the time. And a couple of kind of key points here. Ancient Egypt is credited with inventing male circumcision, right? I don't know if that's a thank you or a curse you, right? But they're credited with inventing circumcision. Very different from today, though. When do we typically circumcise a little boy? Right when they're baby, right when they're newborn, within the first like day or two, typically of birth, right away. In ancient Egypt, this was something that was done as a rite of passage for teenage boys, right? So I just cringe, right? So as a teenage boy, this was your rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. It was practiced as a public ceremony using a stone blade in front of everybody. So welcome to the upper echelon of society, right? And it was typically only something done for people who were wealthier and like the upper to middle class, but a little different from today, right? It was mainly practiced as a ritual, again, as signifying adulthood, and then also to increase cleanliness, which is a big reason why it's still practiced today. It also had a very intense value on procreation. Procreation means sex for the purpose of having children, right? So sex between a man and a woman to have children. And that's something that you see a lot of throughout history, of that being kind of the main reason or the main drive behind sexuality. We also see evidence of like temple prostitutes being very common during this time. But the biggest takeaway is really kind of being responsible for the invention of circumcision, which we'll talk about more in the male anatomy unit. Ancient Greek culture, very like permissive culture, very liberal in the way that we tend to view sexuality now. We see an interesting separation of sex and love within like ancient Greek culture, right? So we have Eros, who is the god of love, right? And this is again in Greek kind of mythology, right? There's also Roman mythology, but we have Eros, the god of love, and Aphrodite as the goddess of sex. So separating the idea of sex and love, right? One of the first times that we have that separated is a documented form of history. We also see an interesting practice called pederasty, which I have up there at the top. Sexual contact between adult men and teenage boys. Now, oftentimes we view Greek culture as being very like homosexual in nature, a lot of homosexuality. It wasn't viewed that way at the time. Pederasty, much like with the Egyptians, it was considered a rite of passage. It was very common in Greek culture for a young man to choose an older man as like a role model and someone to guide them as a mentor. And oftentimes as a way of repaying that, like mentorship and guidance, they would perform sexual acts for that person. It wasn't considered homosexuality as much as it was just like a relationship and a way of thanking that individual. But we tend to view it, a lot of people tend to view it as homosexuality through like a modern lens. So credited with a pederasty, right, as a rite of passage, separating sex and love for the first time, and a very, as I said, very like permissive culture, right? A lot of ideas around sexuality, very forward compared to some other people, kind of starting this normality of the idea of exchanging physical interactions between two people of the same sex. Though again, at the time, it wasn't viewed as being gay or homosexual. The Romans, same area of the world, roughly the same time, we're still in like the BC, getting a little bit closer to our current time. The Romans viewed sex and marriage very differently than we tend to now. Right? Number one reason that people get married now or form in long-term relationships is because they're in love with someone, right? And they want to spend their life with them or they want to be with them. Romans tend to view sex and marriage as a way to improve your economic and social standing. Marriage and relationships were less about love and passion than they were about like your economic well-being and your social like standing and status. So something that is very commonly like noted for the time. There's also a really kind of random thing. These little coins have been found as artifacts, and they're called spintria. I'll write that down. They're little like wood or rock, almost tokens, if you will. And they often portray people on them engaging in some kind of sexual activity. These were thought to be used to pay prostitutes for sex, right? So these little coins that have been found later were thought to be a means of exchange for sex with prostitutes. So again, more record of prostitution all the way back into like Roman and Egyptian times. But here, probably the biggest thing, again, a very different view of sex and marriage and relationships than we tend to have today. Thoughts, questions, comments, anything before I keep going? Yeah.
Was there any contraceptive use at the time?
So ancient Egyptian culture, they tended to, we have documentation of them putting pomegranates up the vaginal canal to block sperm from being able to go up into the uterus. Not very well, right? And you can imagine it probably caused a lot of infections and like problems for the women who did that. But that was one of the very early forms of birth control, along with using sheep intestines as condoms. So we've come a long way since then. Next time you look at a condom, right, you could think people use sheep intestines for a long time. But that was really the only two types that people used back then. Continuing forward, if we look at sexuality in ancient Asia, so here we're looking at India and China, so different region of the world. In India, and we're at 400 BC, so again, continuing to move forward in time, we see an emphasis on something called karma. Right? How would you define karma? What is karma like? What does karma mean? Yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah, what goes around comes around, right? Anyone have anything else you want to add to that? I think that's a pretty great definition. I think it's something like happens and then there's going to be a response to it, right? But karma was something that was really emphasized in ancient like India, right? Looking at positive pursuits like relationships and sex and having children as good karma, that it would come back to you in a good way. Also very known for something called the Kama Sutra, right? One of the most famous sex manuals promoting sex as a passionate activity, right? The Kama Sutra was invented in ancient India, had countless images of different positions, 16 different types of kisses that you could exchange with a partner. Read really, really interesting book, a lot of very graphic images. Still something that's referenced and used today. A lot of portrayals of sexuality in art at the time, but we see a lot of, again, emphasis on karma, Kama Sutra being something that was developed, and a lot of like religion and sexuality being intertwined with each other. In China, around 200 BC, And so continuing to move forward and around the world here, we talk about the interdependence of all energy and things. Interdependence means things working together, right? They're not independent, they're interdependent. So they rely on each other. Talking about something called the Tao, right? Like an energy that we all possess, the basic unity and energy of the universe. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term like yin and yang before, seen like this image here, right? Looking at the interdependence of yin and yang, or female and masculine energy coming together, that men and women coming together in the pursuit of sex are unifying that energy, right? And kind of bringing balance in a sense. Not a lot of, things like homosexuality or like non-traditional relationships as we're going through time, especially in like Chinese culture, looking quite a bit at men and women only pursuing sex as like a form of balance and unifying that masculine and feminine energy. Early Christianity. Right, so a lot of our ideas around sexuality are rooted in religion, right? And if you come from a religious family or have a religious background, there's a lot of religion and sexuality that are intertwined. Not always in the most like progressive or positive way, but there's a lot of connection between the two. Christianity began as a small sect of people following the teachings of Jesus, right? If we go with like the documentation that we have historically. And Christianity in the beginning was a lot about trying to overcome the desires of the flesh, that sexuality was sinful, right? The original sin was sexuality, right? It was like passion and sex. So trying to overcome the desires of the flesh, sexuality being sinful, people being encouraged to be celibate or chaste, right? To have chastity. Celibacy, historically, was defined as people being unmarried, because of course you weren't going to engage in any sex if you weren't married yet. Right? We tend to view celibacy a little bit different now because people do engage in sex long before marriage on average. So it's currently defined as not engaging in sexual behavior or having rules about what behaviors you engage in. But celibacy was very much a part of early Christianity, right? That you were chaste or pure by abstaining from sex. So by not having sex, you were pure, you kept your soul pure, you had overcome the desires of the flesh. So a lot of like trying to avoid the sin of Adam and Eve, right? Which was very like sexual in nature. So we see a lot of religion and religious influences on some of the early ideas of sexuality, especially as we start talking about Christianity and so on. As we go into the Middle Ages, so we're 80 now, like 500 AD, 1400 AD, we see a lot of the church, like the church, again, having a really, really big influence. And we get this interesting split that happened in the way that we viewed women, right? That women were either like Eve or they were like Mary, right? These kind of contradictory images of women, right? And this contributed quite a bit to things like the witch hunts, and a lot of like persecution of women, especially women who were very sexual in nature. But what we got is that Eve was kind of like the negative view of women, right? Eve conversed with the devil for the ruin of man, whereas Mary conversed with Gabriel for the salvation of man. And so we had this idea that women were either like pure and chaste and perfect and not sexual at all, or they were like evil and the devil and they had like consorted with the devil and were being sexual. Right, which again led to a lot of ideas around like the witch trials and women being persecuted for being overly like sexual in nature. And I have to tell you, this is so random, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. Just who I am. I was trying to find like a clip of this, and like I don't know. Sometimes when you go onto YouTube and you type something in, you get really interesting things back. So I'm just going to show. Okay. But that was very common split at the time, right? And obviously caused a lot of issues for women, as very few people fit purely on one side. Continuing on, the Islamic Middle East, about 500 AD. And again, we're just a quick overview of all these different cultures. So here we're looking at Islam. right? And Islam, the followers being Muslim, about 1/5 of the world's population. This is a massive group of individuals. Following the holy book of Islam, which we call the Quran or the Quran, right? And really looking here again at religion and the rules that are being put out there by religious influences, telling people what they can do and what they can't do. Very, very common in the Islamic Middle East to see a lot of rules about women versus men, looking at the rights of women versus men, and a lot of repression for women and women's sexualities. You also get a term that comes out of here that I've heard you, I'm sure you've heard before, eunuch, right? I always think of, from Game of Thrones, what was his name? The guy from Game of Thrones who was a eunuch. Varys, right? It's getting old now, or Johnny Depp says it a lot in Pirates of the Caribbean. But a eunuch was a male who was castrated, right? So typically it had their testicles removed. Very rarely would it be someone who actually had their penis removed, that did sometimes happen. But this was a man who guarded the concubines or like the prostitutes of the Sultan. And so to remove temptation, they had their testicles removed so that they would have less testosterone and less interest in sexuality. So that's where that term comes from. It kind of comes out of this culture and that practice. Again, not so much like the penis being removed, but more the testicles or scrotum being removed to reduce testosterone. Yeah. Yeah. So what happens with the balls or the testicles, right? They're producing sperm, they're producing testosterone, which plays a big role in sex drive. So it was thought to just reduce their interest in sexuality. So testosterone plays a big role in sex drive. And so that's where the practice came from. Other thoughts, questions, anything for? Got a couple more before we stop for the day. The Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment. I feel like I'm back in history all of a sudden, right? But with these three things, the Renaissance means rebirth. And the Renaissance was a very, very sex positive time. And you see this a lot throughout history. You get like a positive progressive time, followed by a very restrictive backward time, and then another positive one, and then a backward one. There's a lot of backlash and give and take that happens. In the Renaissance, we saw a lot of focus on joy in life and art and artistic and intellectual thought. And a big part of joy in life was sexuality. Sexuality was viewed very positively. We moved away from something called asceticism. Asceticism was, not engaging in things like sexual pleasures or eating rich food or any kind of lifestyle that is going to reject sexuality. And so when we started moving away from asceticism to more of a positive idea around sexuality and sex being something that brought people joy in their life and that was encouraged and accepted and okay between a man and a woman for the purposes of having children, right? Again, that's still very much the case that we see throughout history. In the Reformation, we get a little bit of a backlash to that. We get Martin Luther and Protestantism. Right, so we get a little bit of progressive that sexuality is okay between a husband and a wife and is encouraged, but we start to go backward a little bit. We see rules and different regulations being put into place around sexuality. And then following that, we get the Enlightenment, where we again go back to sexual pleasure as being natural and desirable and positive. And so back and forth throughout history, kind of positive, more restricted, and more positive. We're kind of going in that alternating cycle. The last one that we'll talk about for today is the Victorian era. And then we'll pick up from here next time. And as I said, I have a great documentary that we're going to watch about 20th century sexuality in the United States. And this was kind of the last precursor to that, right? Our ideas around sexuality have been very shaped by all these different cultures that we've mentioned quickly here. And the Victorian era, named after Queen Victoria, who took the throne in 1837 until 1901. You don't need to know those dates. But this was a time of self-restraint. And if you had to sum up this era in one article of clothing, it was like the corset or the bodice, right? Literally tying down, right? Being restrictive and proper and very formal. This was a period of time where people had a lot of repression of sexuality. right? And this went all the way into like the early 1900s. The biggest threat to female sexuality in this era was the bicycle. It was thought that if a woman rode a bicycle, they would never be the same again. They would never be able to enjoy the touch of a man again if they rode a bicycle. Bike on here, that it would ruin their sexuality forever. More on that in the documentary that we'll watch. But women and men at this time slept in separate beds, right? It wasn't allowed to sleep even with a husband, with a partner. And again, we're still talking about like typically male-female relationships. You weren't allowed to sleep in the same bed as your partner. It wasn't allowed to be shown on TV even until like the 1960s. And I remember it's so funny when my partner and I first started dating, we went to visit her grandparents. And they had separate beds that they had from like the 1930s. And they made us sleep in separate beds. And I thought it was maybe because like we were two women together, but no, it's everyone. Everyone slept in separate beds. Maybe too much information, but we took the mattresses and put them on the floor. I was like, I'm not doing this, right? But really like a time of propriety. Like you don't engage in sex. You don't talk about sex. You're very formal and very repressed. Women were viewed as asexual. Right? They weren't interested in sex and weren't allowed to talk about or show interest. A lot of distance between men and women, between husbands and wives. And so prostitution flourished. This is a time where prostitution really took off, right? Because people weren't supposed to be sexual. And so sexuality just kind of went underground. And people engaged in record amounts of prostitution because of all that propriety and repression outwardly in culture. A really, really interesting time, and we'll talk more about the bike and then later the automobile, the next big scandalous threat to sexuality. So that's what we'll do next time is we'll pick up here and we'll talk a little bit about sexuality in the United States, and then we'll watch part of a documentary. I want to give a few minutes to take attendance and collect your cards. So if you want to take a second, you're welcome to pack up. I'll grab the attendance sheet and then we will call it a day. All right. So again, I'll go through this today and then next week, and then we'll do a little more after that. And if I continue to mispronounce your name, correct me. I'll get to it. And then before you leave today, make sure I get those next cards. And if at any point you won, I will forget to do this. If at any point you won one of those Kahoot rounds, don't forget to get some candy. Most important thing of the day, all right? I added some new candy. These are delicious, by the way. A little caramel in them. So not to sell them to you. I don't know. I had like 3 of them yesterday. I was like, ooh, these are. All right, Abigail, Jocelyn here, Tyler here, Grayson here, Abigail here, Robert here, Andres, Caitlin here, Caitlin Holmes, yeah, Jesse here, Andrew here, Tony here, Francis here, Ryden here, Sam here, Scarlett here, AJ here, Brianna person. Anne, Cassandra here. Aspen. Brian here. Alexander. Katie, Catherine, and Olivia. Okay, if I didn't call your name, come check in with me. I think maybe 1 or 2 of you might, there was one more person than there was last time. But if I didn't call your name, come talk to me, come get some candy. If you won that, drop off your index card. And then I will see you all on Monday. We'll keep going with the rest of chapter 1. Good stuff, folks.